What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to another live edition of the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron. Kory, how are we doing on this Sunday?
So I wish it was Saturday, but no, it's Sunday. Sunday's my favorite day, and we actually don't record a lot on Sundays. So this is a little bit different, but free agency, man, things change.
Yeah, honestly, this is probably our first Sunday show other than recaps of the finals. So I'm looking forward to it. We're getting to the free agency positional previews. We dropped point guards already, small forwards. We're doing power forwards today. Centers and shooting guards are coming up. But as always, you can check us out iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play Radio, and YouTube. But let's get into it. Let's start with the power forward position. Not necessarily the biggest class here. Topping the class off because he is healthy would be Tobias Harris. Thoughts on Tobias Harris going to this free agency?
Tobias Harris probably has increased his stock every year since leaving Orlando. Same as Victor Oladipo, continues to flourish in different systems. Detroit was probably a little bit weird at first. Really flourished last year with the Clippers, then got traded, and as we know, was a part of that, whatever you want to call that, big starting five of the Philadelphia 76ers. Can beat you off the dribble, decent catch and shoot guy, can hit the long ball, good rebounder, probably an above average rebounder for his size and position. There's a lot to like about Tobias Harris. Not probably your number one option, maybe not even your number two, but as a number three, number four option, a very good guy to have.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't say he's your number one or number two option. Like you said, he's gotten better every year. Very efficient shooter. Defensively, you want a little bit more out of him, especially because he has good size, but not necessarily the lateral quickness. So he's almost like a tweener offensively. He does enough to be a small forward. Defensively, he's probably better off defending power forward. So interesting player. Like you said, I wouldn't really want him as my first. I probably wouldn't want him as my second option because he's just not that aggressive. And that was always the issue with him. The numbers were nice in LA, but they still had guys like Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell that were putting up the big performances in the fourth quarter. And then we know in Philly, he really had a quiet postseason. It wasn't a bad postseason. It was just quiet, just not enough there. You'd like to see a little bit more. Maybe in a different situation, he'd be a little bit better. But if he is your second option, you would want your third option, that gap between those two, not to be very big at all, or maybe just like a 2A and a 2B option. I think third option is best for him. Fourth option would be super ideal, but you're going to be paying him a lot of money. And I think in terms of where he's at free agency wise, this is an ideal situation for him to be in because there's a good chance he could get maxed out. What are your thoughts on him being maxed out?
We've talked about this a few times. There's a lot of guys who are going to get max money who probably aren't max players. Now, do I think Tobias Harris could maybe get to be worth a max player down the line? It's possible. But as of right now, he's not necessarily a max player guy in my mind. He's going to get max player money, but I don't think he is a max player type of player. As we mentioned, he's a third or fourth option, can kind of go dormant into an offensive scheme. Like it's not like he's a guy who you say, all right, Tobias, we really need some buckets. Go get me some buckets. He really needs the offense to kind of come to him, which I think puts down his value slightly. But again, this is, as we mentioned, a tweener. He can play the three, he can play the four, and the small ball era, he is like the prototypical four you want with his shooting abilities. And just about every team it feels like, well, not every team, but a majority of the teams are looking for that kind of tweener, that small ball four guy who can play the three. And Tobias Harris is the best you can get on the market right now.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think his fit in the NBA right now and what teams need from a big position to stretch the floor and open up space is ideal. It's just like, how much are you willing to pay? And I ran a poll earlier on the OTG account. Is Tobias Harris worth a max? 25% yes, 75% no.
Yeah.
And his max would be $32 million starting next season. And then by the time it's the fourth year, I believe it would be around $40 million.
Yeah, so, paying Tobias Harris $40 million is scary. Like that is
correction, $37 million, but still close enough to $40 million.
Right. It's still concerning because that's Kevin Love money, right? And is Tobias Harris in the same category as Kevin Love? I mean, maybe now because Kevin Love's a little bit older and more banged up. But yeah, it's a lot of money for a guy like Tobias Harris. I mean, good for him.
Yeah, I think Kevin Love has a little bit more to his offensive games in terms of like playmaking and setting up others, and I think he's a lot better rebounder. But Tobias Harris would probably have the nod defensively. Either guy elite defenders, but still. Me and Jack have discussed Tobias Harris a lot in the Brooklyn Buzz, and I think like a number you're looking for, if you can get him in the 20s on a contract that doesn't ascend, if you're paying him $25 million, $100 million over 4 years, that's not terrible. That's not, the worst contract. If you're getting in that 30 range, it's a little scary, and you're you got to bet on him getting a lot better. And I'm not really sure how much better he can really get. You know, there's a few skills he can add, but he had a really good season last year for what we've seen from him in the past.
And he is going to, I think he's going to be 27, if I'm correct.
So entering his prime.
Right, entering his prime, which also means there's not going to be a great level of variation with the stats going forward generally. We may see a little bit jump in scoring output, but efficiency is probably right around where last year should be going forward in his prime. But you're not going to see very many more jumps in his game.
Yeah, he'll be 27 on July 15th, so spot on, Kory. And like you said, efficiency last year, he shot, 49% from the field with the Clippers, 46% from the field with the Sixers. His three-point percentage with the Clippers was amazing, 43%. And then with Philly, it was only at 32%. So that is a little concerning. He has shot 36% from three in his career, and he does have a couple seasons over 40%.
I will say, just to put like an asterisk next to the 32, because the only three-point shooters on that Philly team was him and JJ Redick, and they really kind of tried to make Tobias Harris like a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. So again, we've mentioned this before. The environment and the system he was playing in maybe just wasn't his best fit in Philly.
Yeah, and Jack was telling me yesterday he read a report that something about Tobias Harris talking about the next team he goes to, he wants to compete for a championship, but he also wants to be a really good fit for him. So a lot of ball movement, a lot of touches. It seems like an ideal fit would be Brooklyn. They have bigger fish in mind, but he could be a backup plan. We discussed that a little on the Buzz, another plug right there. But what are some landing spots for Tobias Harris?
I think the Brooklyn Nets were one of them for sure. If the Utah Jazz could free up money by somehow moving favors and maybe another contract or two, I think Utah would be an ideal fit. I think the Pacers would be another team I wouldn't mind him seeing as a stretch four, playing alongside his old teammate Victor Oladipo. And then aside from that, I mean, if Boston feels really desperate because they've lost all these guys, maybe they go after Tobias Harris because they are now lacking big men because Al Horford's gone, Baines is gone. So maybe they look to get him as a stretch four. If the Lakers wanted to try and bring in Tobias Harris as a stretch four alongside Anthony Davis and LeBron, I could see that as well. I mean, we mentioned there's a lot of teams that could use the services of Tobias Harris. And like you said, the fact that he wants to be in a system that predicates on ball movement, you can also kind of narrow down that list a little bit. Denver Nuggets as well. I think the Denver Nuggets actually might be my favorite fit of anybody if you're talking about a team with ball movement and the type of flow they have offensively. And they will be looking for a power forward unless they bring back Paul Millsap. Yeah,
they would definitely need to open up some money to get him, but there's a possibility they could do it. I mean, I would really like to fit in Denver. You mentioned Brooklyn, obviously. I even think the Knicks are a possibility too, as like a younger guy they could add. Tobias Harris is from Long Island, so he does have a connection to that metro area. Boston's interesting. You mentioned the Lakers. Utah, I was pretty high in Utah trying to go after him. Now I think it's a little bit more difficult with picking up Mike Conley. But there's plenty of teams. Like there's a lot of lists. We're not going to mention every single team because I think he could fit in so many different systems. I think what it's going to come down to is contract-wise. What would be a number you'd like to give him?
I would be comfortable giving him as much as $25 million. It would be as high as I would go. I would personally want to settle somewhere between 20 and 23.
Yeah, I think I would maybe go up to 27 if it's a locked-in rate for the next 4 years because the cap's going to slightly improve, and I don't mind slightly overpaying him if he's a really good fit in the system. But ideally, I'd go, I think, 25, 100. But I could easily see a team maxing him out. It just seems like a possibility. I could see Philly keeping him and maxing him out, maxing out him and Jimmy Butler. Like that's not something that's out of the realm of possibility. So a lot of different options for Tobias Harrison. A relatively weak power forward class. Not saying that there's not other good players, but he's the one guy who's closest to an all-star, fringe all-star that's not a restricted free agent. So
I think he's the one power forward that can actually really elevate your team if you're looking for, like, if you're not going to get a Butler or a D'Lo, like he's still a guy who can really take your team to the next level.
Yeah, he's like that next step down. He's in tier 2 or tier 3 instead of the tier 1 guys. And that's going to end up getting you paid because there's so much money to be thrown around and not enough teams are going to get it. So it'll be interesting what happens with Tobias. On to Kristaps Porzingis, restricted free agent. Obviously, the Mavs made a trade for him this year. I think it's highly unlikely that he ends up leaving. They probably match any offer sheet he receives.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't have traded for Porzingis unless they planned on bringing back Porzingis or they planned on keeping him. And there's obviously mutual talks already to a degree. I mean, Porzingis not a free agent in my mind. This is going to be a guy for Dallas. But what you like about Porzingis, the fact that he's a stretch big. I mean, the guy can shoot threes, fantastic rim protector because of his length, can dribble a little bit. The one issue still for him is probably durability, stamina, size. Can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the floor? Can he last the duration of an 82-game season? Can he develop a more of rebounding wise? I mean, like, I think he's an okay rebounder, but just definitely not a guy who's very good at battling people on the boards. But still, this is a very young guy who's still got so much upside coming back from an ACL injury, which is also probably a little bit of a concern because of his size. But modern medicine's tremendous nowadays.
And he's very young. So it's not like you're as concerned about him recovering. It's not like he's 30 or anything like that, low 20s. I love Porzingis. I think if he was an unrestricted free agent, he'd probably be one of the top guys just because of what we saw from him in New York. And he's had pretty much the full year to recover. It's not like they rushed him back or anything like that. I mean, I think Porzingis could end up being an elite player. Like, there's still a chance for him to end up being a top 15 type player because you mentioned offensive pop he has. His game is really tough to defend. I mean, he can shoot the three ball. He can shoot on all levels, has a little bit of a post game, improved his handles a bit. He's willing to throw down on people. Defensively, rim protection is great. Before the injury, versatility too, defending on the perimeter a little bit, obviously not an elite defender at that level, but could get there. So, I mean, Porzingis would be a guy I would absolutely love on my team, but I just see no way that Dallas lets him go.
Yeah, no, the whole point of this trade was to pair up the European stars and Luka and Porzingis, and they're going to do just that.
Exactly. So, I mean, we could talk about landing spots, but like we said, it's probably not going to happen. I think a team would be willing to offer him a max offer sheet just to make Dallas match because I know he does have meetings set up, but there's not really any point to it.
Boston Celtics take the gamble.
They could. I mean, if the Nets weren't into like the bigger stars right now, I would almost guarantee they'd send off max offer sheet to Porzingis. They have a lot of interest in him. He had interest in the Nets when he was on the block. So see what happens. Julius Randle's next up. This is probably a guy that you're either really high on or you're really low on. I'll give you my opinion after. What are your thoughts on him?
I can say right now I'm really high on him.
Okay, and I'm the opposite.
So I'm high on him. I think we also forget to a degree that he missed his rookie season with the broken leg. And also, when you suffer an injury that takes you out for a year, I always think the next year is it's not going to be a year where you see much. I mean, Paul George took him a full year to get back. Gordon Hayward, as we saw him coming back last year. It generally takes players a full year after coming back from an injury to really get back to themselves. So him breaking his leg, coming back. The things I like about Julius Randle are the fact that he's a tenacious guy on the boards, battles. He can run the floor a little bit. I mean, he can dribble. He's got better handles than most guys at his position. A decent post game. Defense is obviously where you're really struggling with him. Not a great perimeter defender. A little bit small down low, so doesn't necessarily get in the best positions. 3-point shot finally took a jump last season with the Pelicans. Is that sustainable? I mean, that's probably what makes him. If he develops a sustainable jump shot, you probably don't worry about the defensive deficiencies as much. But it's all dependent on that jump shot. So I think he's an extremely versatile player at this point in time. Being 23, going to be 24, I think. So I like the offensive side of his game a lot more than his defense. But again, there's still a lot of time for him to get his game together. And I mean, we're looking at the rest of the power forwards we have, him being young. Why not take the risk on a young guy who's already shown increasing steps in his career?
Yeah, the thing I don't like about Julius Randle, I'm not sure his game is necessarily helping winning basketball. Like, offensively, he has a package. He can drive inside. He can rebound. 3-point shot improved, but still a 30% 3-point shooter for his career. Defensively, he's bad. Like, he's not a good defender. His lateral quickness isn't there, and you mentioned his size. He's not a rim protector. He tries to be sometimes, but he just doesn't have the elite athleticism or the length to really do an impact in the paint. I think if you're signing Julius Randle, you need to have an ideal fit next to him. I think truly his best position is small ball 5, but if you're paying him big money, you want to be a starter, and you're probably not matching him up with starting level center. So he's like a tweener that could probably be good off the bench, but defensively, if you have a bad defensive point guard and then you're pairing a Julius Randle out there, I'm attacking him in the point guard and pick and roll situation every time because he just is not a good defender at that level. And the one thing that would concern me is he played his best basketball when the Pelicans were in tank mode. So he didn't really put up his great numbers when they were still competing for the playoffs. A lot of that came post All-Star break when the Pelicans already threw in the white flag. So I would be nervous to throw big money at him. I think there's some situations where it'd work out. Maybe if you have a stretch five, somebody to spread the floor, because he's best attacking the paint. You mentioned his handles are pretty good. He can get out in transition. So I'd be nervous about giving Randall big money. I know a lot of Nets fans are pretty high on him coming to the Nets, and I didn't want none of it. What are your thoughts for landing spots?
I think there's a possibility he still goes back to the Pelicans. I think a slight chance. I don't think it's a lock. Obviously, him opting out of his $9 million a year deal, because he's probably going to get somewhere between 15, 20 million, maybe even an overpay if some young team really thinks he could be something. But I think you're looking at young teams rebuilding. Maybe the Atlanta Hawks, maybe the New York Knicks. If they strike out, the Knicks go, well, we can grab Randall, try and bring another young guy alongside Barrett and Knox, see what happens. I mean, I would have said the Suns, but then going after Dario Saric on draft night, I think they kind of filled in their power forward hole. Those are really, and I also have down just the Utah Jazz if they wanted to try and get creative and maybe try and bring in a small ball four. But I don't have a lot of landing spots for Julius Randle, because I do think, even though I like him, I think the contract he's probably going to receive on the market is going to be way overpriced for what I think he's going to bring to a team.
Yeah, that's a pretty probable scenario, similar to Tobias Harris, but I feel more comfortable giving Tobias Harris extra money than Julius Randle, because I think he could have a bigger impact on winning basketball. You mentioned Boston as a possibility, New York, I think. Atlanta, I'm not as high on, because I think his game is somewhat similar to John Collins, and I would prefer John Collins over him. It's tough to say. I think he'd be one of the guys where a team just has money afterwards, and they're like, all right, let's throw some money at Julius Randle. He put up some nice points last year. We can kind of sell that to our franchise, and why not?
Yeah.
See what we can do. I mean, I don't know if you want to give him a long-term deal. Maybe you give him another 2-year deal with a team option for the third year or a player option, just to kind of get a better feel for who he is, because I think we don't really know who Julius Randle is as a basketball player yet, because he's bounced around and been in some weird situations. What would be the contract you think he'll land?
If I had to guess, he's probably going to get 4 years, $22 million a year. If I had to guess, and that's an overpay. Personally, I would look to probably do what you're saying, like a 2-year plus one, somewhere around like 17 million, 16 million. I would want to see more, even like a 1-and-1 with a player option, and not even giving him 16 million, just doubling what he made last year. But giving him an option to test the market again. But again, I almost have no doubt in my mind feeling that this is going to be a guy we see overpaid.
Yeah, I agree. I think 15 to 20 range would be a decent scenario. I'd probably want to pay him a little bit less, but that's just my perception on him. Mm-hmm. But I agree. I think there's a real chance he could be a guy that gets overpaid this summer, and that's not usually ideal.
No.
Anything else on Randle before we move on?
No. One of the few players we actually really disagree on, but that's always fun.
Nikola Mirotic, who had a solid beginning of the year, but then, he was injured. Then he was traded to Milwaukee, injured in Milwaukee. Then his playoff run was not very good.
Yeah. Talk about your value dropping quickly. When he went to Milwaukee, we pretty much said, that's it. Milwaukee's winning the chip this year. This was the stretch 4 they really needed. And the injury definitely hurt. Looks really unplayable in that playoff series against Boston and against the Raptors. Just couldn't really keep him out there. Sloppy with the basketball, couldn't shoot. The upside is Mirotic is streaky. I mean, this is a guy who does go into shooting funks, but when he is hot, he is a lethal 3-point shooter, can beat you offensively in a lot of different ways. Not a good defender. You're not getting defense with Mirotic. This is an offense-only player. Not a starter either. This is definitely a guy you want to come off as like your 6th, 7th man off the bench. Probably not even 6th, probably 7th or 8th man off the bench in a 20 to 26 minute role a night. But yeah, I mean, it's a 3-point shooter, which is very hard to come by in today's NBA.
He's a really extremely difficult player to gauge, because you mentioned he's so streaky. The previous year in New Orleans, in the postseason, he was excellent, and he was good on both ends of the floor. Last year, not so much. In the playoffs, teams were just like, all right, we're going to let him shoot and see what happens. That Toronto series, they were like, all right, Mirotic is cold. We don't really have to worry about him, because he's really 3-point based. His other skills weren't great in Milwaukee. I don't know if it's because of the system or maybe just some issues he was having coming back from injury. I think he could be your 5th starter, because he does provide you floor spacing and he's a solid rebounder. Defensively, he's like hit or miss. Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad. So he's a guy that'll probably get overpaid as well, just because he's one of the few stretch 4s in the market that truly can knock down threes and get hot. He'd be a guy that I think Utah would like because he's not as expensive as a guy like Tobias Harris could give you that stretch four. And then defensively, like I said, he has good moments, he has bad moments. You have a little protection with Gobert behind him. What are some other landing spots you like for Mirotic?
I'm looking at a lot of contenders. And also, because I think there is a slight chance that his number pay wise dropped because of the Milwaukee stint. I don't think it probably dropped much, but I think it dropped. So I think Boston, if they're looking for shooting, I think Philly, if they miss out on, like, let's say Tobias Harris or Jimmy Butler, maybe they go, okay, we still need 3-point shooting alongside Ben Simmons and Embiid. Maybe they go give Mirotic an offer. I don't think there's a chance for it, but I would like the Pacers, if they're trying to add 3-point shooting, to look at Mirotic at least off the bench. When you have a very good defensive system like the Pacers, you can kind of make up for having a guy who's not very good defensively if he can give you 3-point shooting. And then flip. I mean, I think the Brooklyn Nets too, if they had cap left over, Mirotic wouldn't be the worst guy for them to come off the bench for 3-point shooting. And then you look over in the West, Denver, Lakers, Clippers, even if they wanted to try and just do a smart little retool, because then you can probably flip Mirotic at the deadline if you want to just bring him in for an asset purpose. Minnesota, do they sure up their power forward hole? And they traded Starjic, so they're looking for a power forward. So I think Minnesota would be a possibility, and then the last one would be Utah.
Yeah, I think with Minnesota, if they do get cap space, I think they're trying to send an offer sheet to D'Angelo Russell. But
right.
It'll be interesting. A lot of those teams, he's another guy that'll be a popular name around because he's a guy you can get cheaper than some of the other players and then still give you that possible stretch four. And I'm sure coaches and front offices around the league are kind of unsure about him, and they think maybe we can take him to that level to be a little bit more consistent. Maybe something sticks out about his game because when he's playing well, he's really good. Yeah. It's not like he's a bad player. When he's playing well, he's really good. It's just that sometimes he really drops off and goes through these cold streaks. So what would you think contract-wise for him?
He's probably looking at a 3-year deal. I say Mirotic. I don't think Mirocic's a 4-year deal guy. So I think you're looking at 3 years. And if I'm taking into account the Milwaukee stint, I probably would lock in him making 3 years, $17 million a year.
Yeah, I think he'll get way more than that.
I think he'll get way more than that.
Yeah, I think he would get like 3 years, $30 million. He made like $9 million last year, and he's good enough, and he's a stretch four. He'll provide for a team. I think he'd at least get $10 million.
Well, no, I'm saying $17 million a year would be.
Okay.
No, $17 million a year, not 17 over 3. No. Like, that's disrespectful to Mirotic. No. I think he probably gets like 3 years, $50 million, $45 million, somewhere like that.
Yeah, I'd probably want to play him, ideally you want to pay him like 10, but he'll probably get somewhere between that 10 to 17 range. Another guy that could get overpaid because, like I said, some teams see a player and they're like, all right, he's inconsistent. We can maybe push him to that consistent level. And there's just enough where he shows you a glimpse of being a really good player that you're like, maybe we can take this guy to the next step. Obviously, he's getting up there in age because he wasn't a true NBA rookie. So something to keep in mind as well. Next up on our list, we got Paul Millsap, who has a team option for $30 million, and I would bet a lot of money that obviously Denver's going to decline that. What are your thoughts on Paul Millsap?
Definitely on the backside of his career. This is the final stretch for Millsap, but not a bad player at all still. Obviously, his role in the offense really digressed or regressed in Denver. It was probably like the 4th option offensively on most nights. Still a very good rebounder, had plenty of very nice moments, especially in that Portland Trailblazers series. Obviously, Portland's a little bit smaller, so Millsap and Jokic really got their way of trying to bully Portland. But a vet, can pass the ball, still plays good defense. Millsap can just do a little bit of everything. Probably can still be your 5th starter, right? Can probably still be a 5th, 4th starter.
Yeah.
On most teams. The most weakness to his game at this point is probably just his lateral quickness and speed overall, but he can still shoot the long ball. So Millsap's a really good vet on the market.
Yeah, I think he could be your 4th or 5th starter. I think he does a lot. He's like a hustle player now. He doesn't necessarily have the same offensive pop that he used to. Defensively, still makes a lot of really good reads, can rebound the ball, has good size, can play a little bit of small ball 5. Very smart player. He's a guy that could help take a team to the next level, not a huge jump, but a small jump in terms of a couple wins because his impact isn't necessarily just showing up on the stat sheet. I like Millsap. I think whatever team gets him, as long as it's a solid deal, will really benefit from bringing him in as just a veteran presence.
Definitely.
There's talk about him going back to Utah. What other teams do you like for landing Paul Millsap?
I mean, depending on what his agenda is, because I think this is also a guy who, like you mentioned, maybe takes a pay cut to try and go get a ring.
True.
I think that's a possibility. So I think I wouldn't throw out the Lakers. I would say the Celtics would be an option. I would say if the Rockets somehow could free up some cap, I really would like the thought of him in Houston if they can somehow move Capella. If Philly strikes out, I could see Philly. I also see a scenario where maybe San Antonio tries to go after him, but again, with him and Aldridge, it could be a weird fit. But I think they could use the shooting. Portland was mentioned when he was a free agent a couple of years ago. If they could free up some cap, I wouldn't mind seeing him in Portland. I mean, you can almost knock down any contender. Like OKC would be a name I think about as well. Maybe even Dallas, if you want to put up some sort of veteran alongside Porzingis. Porzingis maybe at the 5, Millsap at the 4, depending on where you see Porzingis playing. I don't think he ends up back in Denver, though. That's the one thing I can say for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many options for him because the contract is really unsure. We don't know how much money he's going to get. Will he take a pay cut, like you mentioned, to be on a contender? There's options. I think if one thing's clear, though, I would find it unlikely for him to go to a non-playoff team.
Yes,
I would expect him to go to a playoff team and try to maybe win. He's been, somewhat close in a lot of these, postseasons. He probably wants to just get that chip. And I think he would also be willing to not start and be our first big off the bench. And that's not a bad player to have off the bench. So his contract is really unknown because, like we said, he could take a cut. He's not going to get a big contract. He might touch double digits, but other than that, you could get him for a good price, and he's going to really help your team.
I also want to say, I think people kind of blow out of proportion the fact of I'm going to come off the bench. Lou Williams is the perfect example of a guy who comes off the bench, and it doesn't matter that he comes off the bench. He still plays 25 to 35 minutes a night. So there's just that stigma that comes with, he's coming off the bench. You can still play big time minutes and be a crucial part to a team off the bench.
Yeah, for me, it's always been about how many minutes you play, not where your role is if you're coming off the bench or not, because there's some players who start and they play 20 minutes. You know what I mean? We've seen with the Warriors in the past, a lot of their centers have not really played big minutes. They start the game, they start the third quarter, and then you don't see them the rest of the game. So it is what it is. I'm not really that concerned with starting or being off the bench, whatever it may be. But after Millsap, we got a guy pretty well, Thad Young.
Love Thad Young.
Would you say Thad Young is underrated or overrated?
Underrated. Man, it sucks because I know he's not coming back next year. Thaddeus Young does everything you want from a 4-5 starter. He was team captain for the Pacers, which also says a lot about his character. This is a guy who was doing a master's program during the NBA season, would go to a game and then go home and do homework all night. So that just shows the dedication and hard work of Thaddeus Young, the player. Plays plays power forward, can probably play a little bit of small forward. You don't want at the small forward, you can't shoot. Hustle. Tenacious defender, probably one of the better defenders, probably one of the most underrated defenders, actually. Was one of the best Giannis Antetokounmpo defenders in the Eastern Conference last year. Underrated passer, can get to the rim. The biggest issue with Thaddeus Young is the fact that he's just not a very good three-point shooter. There are moments where he looks like he could be a decent three-point shooter, but he's just very streaky. And that's the one part of his game that's probably his Achilles heel. Because I think everything else on paper, at least, and watching him is what you love to see out of a guy like Thaddeus Young.
Yeah, you mentioned the defensive season. I think a lot of people talked about that maybe being a reason that Miles Turner didn't get as much love is because Thad Young was also so good. So when you have two really good defenders, it kind of takes some of the love away from one of the other guys. But you mentioned, I love that. Obviously, he played for the Nets for a little bit. But the biggest thing that hurts him is his three-point shot. He'd be the ideal stretch forward because he can guard multiple positions. He's a good rebounder for his size. He gets inside. He can finish with both hands, has a pretty good post game, especially if he gets a mismatch. So I'm really interested to see what he can do in terms of the market and where he'll land, because I think he's another guy that impacts winning basketball. And if you can place him next to a stretch five, like Miles Turner was a really good fit for him because he was a stretch five. There's another role for him out there. I think that'd really work out, or just being one of the first guys off the bench.
Yeah, whether it's coming off the bench or being a starter, there is certainly plenty of spots, especially on contenders, that could use Thaddeus Young. And I think for him personally, being the competitor that he is, he's more than likely going to be looking for a scenario where he can win. He's kind of already had the early stages of his career between the Timberwolves, Brooklyn, where he wasn't really playing winning basketball. And now that he's had the taste for winning basketball, I think that's probably where he's going to be looking to go for his next destination.
Yeah, I believe he's never been on a deep playoff run. His longest run is probably with Philadelphia when he went to the second round early on in his career. So I would see him going to a contender, and that's another guy similar to Millsap where maybe he takes a pay cut to sign with a better team.
I don't think he will, though. When it comes to pay cut, I doubt that he's going to take a pay cut only because he's kind of been on those team-friendly deals to this point already. And I think his value has certainly gone up since he signed with the Pacers or got traded to the Pacers.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. What are some places you think he can land?
Now that my laptop's plugged in, I all of a sudden at 5% battery, got a little nervous there. So let's see. I think when you're looking, I think Boston would be a possibility again. I think teams that lost stars are going to be looking at these guys who can kind of come in and fill a role. So I think Boston's a possibility. I think if Philly strikes out on their free agents, he's a possibility in Philly, even though I don't like the fit necessarily because they need shooting and he just becomes another issue when it comes to shooting. Flip over to the Western Conference. I think if the Lakers are trying to fill in the roster full of vets, Thaddeus Young might be like the best kind of guy to have next to Anthony Davis. But then again, does him and LeBron fit, or does he come off the bench in a six-man role? Possibility, different question mark. Maybe the Denver Nuggets, they have all this offense. Maybe they're looking for a guy who can do some of the nitty-gritty defensive stuff like Thaddeus Young can bring. I also like the thought of maybe the Utah Jazz going after him. Again, the shooting would be an issue, but he fits in with their culture of their grit and grind, and them playing hard. And that's really it for my destinations on Thaddeus Young at this point.
How much do you think he'll get?
I would say somewhere between 15 and 20 million.
Yeah, I think he might get a little bit less just because of his age, because he is
31. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's not necessarily like a big pop guy because he's not going to be your first, second, third option or fourth option. He'll probably be your fifth. I'd probably drop him more down into like a $9 to $16 million range. I think depending on what he's looking at in terms of deal, because when you're at that age, I think you're usually trying to get at least a 3-year deal, maybe 2-year deal, but because you want to lock up that money because you don't know what's going to happen. After you hit that 30 mark, bigger chance for injury, bigger chance that your skills just kind of go down a little bit. So if he wanted to get a big contract in terms of per year, I think it'd be like a 1 or 2 year deal. But if he's looking for long-term, he'll take a lesser amount to be in the situation.
Yeah.
So he's an interesting guy. Like a lot of these power forwards, they're not like popping out to you other than Tobias Harris and Kristaps, but they have the potential to improve your team. And I think a lot of it comes down to what's the paycheck going to look like for these guys.
I actually just thinking about it too. If I granted, I don't know if he wants to win, this isn't a scenario, but like the Sacramento Kings, that could also be a place for him going to the small ball four. Obviously, they got a load of guys in forwards and Marvin Bagley, Harry Giles, but he could flip into like a mentor role, ship over in Sacramento. And I also want to say if somehow Portland was able to shed some cap, I wouldn't mind seeing him in Portland because I feel like he fits in with that kind of system.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities out there, and a lot of these guys we've talked about, we're kind of unsure with their contract amount because they may take the pay cut to be on a contender, or they may just want to be in a certain situation or like where they're at. So it's intriguing. The power forward market's pretty hard to gauge because a lot of these guys are just like all over the place, and certain teams just might value a skill set that we're not valuing the same.
Yeah, and again, when there's so few to select from, it means there's so many more names in the hat.
Yeah, exactly. And another guy who I think is an interesting power forward, Marcus Morris, had some really big moments with the Celtics. Feel like he's a perfect six-man to bring off the bench at that power forward position.
Yeah, I love Marcus Morris. He was at one point in time, I think, like the best three-point shooter on the Celtics last year. Plays good defense, chip on his shoulder, physical. He can hit the three. Just a little bit of everything decently well. Definitely a guy who can come off the bench as a sixth man or a seventh man. His probably biggest issue is the fact he's just very inconsistent offensively.
Yep.
He can go in these cold stretches. But mostly you like what you see from Morris. He's a crazy guy, but you like to have that on your team.
Yeah, he's kind of a no-nonsense attitude type. And also just a quick plug, free agent previews are on otgbasketball.com, including most of the guys we discussed today. So be sure to check that out. But you mentioned offensively he's a little inconsistent. Defensively, I feel like he's a little bit underrated. He had some really good moments as a defender. And I think he's just a guy you look to add and come off in that bench role. As long as you have a solid locker room, I don't think you mind bringing a guy like Marcus Morris. And I think he's another guy that can provide a nice impact for your team, even you're not breaking the bank to get him.
No, definitely.
Where do you like?
This is a good value.
Where do you like in terms of landing spots? I think he's another guy, like we mentioned, Thad Young. He can land in a lot of spots because I don't think his pay is going to be that big. And he's a guy that you have a role for because he's coming off the bench or possibly your fifth starter.
Yeah, I see Orlando Magic as a possibility. They're losing Terrence Ross likely, so maybe he goes into a reserve role over there. Obviously, they had a nice playoff appearance to start this year. I could see him maybe going to Brooklyn, depending on how free agency pans out. Maybe they go after a wing like him. Clippers, I could see Denver trying to add some more defense, but trying to keep the three-point shooting that has made them an offensive juggernaut. I could see the Utah Jazz trying to add shooting while not trying to lose too much defense. Dallas could be interesting. I think their roster construction, aside from Luka and Porzingis, is really still a question mark with Tim Hardaway Jr. and everything else. Maybe they try and add a 3-and-D wing. The Blazers, if they can make contract room. And then, maybe Philly, if things go bad for Philly. And then you're probably looking at the Lakers, Celtics. I think the Celtics have a very good chance of retaining Marcus Morris too.
Yeah, that's very true. It seems like he liked his time there. Also, there's always a possibility him wanting to play with his brother again. They were really upset when I forget who got traded from Phoenix first.
I think it was Markieff.
Yeah, and they weren't too happy about that. I like Marcus Morris, and I would probably, if I'm looking for a stretch four, he might be my second option because, like we said, Porzingis is probably off the table. I think I'd prefer to sign Marcus Morris over Nikola Mirotic.
I would too. I mean, you're losing a little bit on the 3-point shooting, but you're getting enough back on the defense. And actually, are you really even losing that much on the 3-point shooting? Because he can also get to the rim a little bit. I would definitely take Marcus Morris over Mirotic, and I don't think that's a hot take.
Yeah, I think, the 3-point shooting, because Mirotic can hit a little bit of the tougher threes, you know what I mean, like off balance and whatnot.
Yeah.
But Marcus Morris has the ability to get hot, both streaky guys, and you're getting Morris for a lesser price, where Mirotic might be a slightly better player. It'd be interesting. I think a lot of teams might go after him a little bit sooner than we anticipate.
I wouldn't doubt it.
We got a couple guys we can mention if you want to stop on anybody. Aminu, Bobby Portis, Taj Gibson, Markieff Morris, Kenneth Faried, Jeff Green, Jermichael Green. Who sticks out to you?
Aminu, and I already forgot his name. Who's the second name you said?
Bobby Portis.
Both of those guys. Aminu, first off, thank you for following me on Twitter still. I like Aminu. He plays very good defense. Below average rebound, no, below average, an above average rebounder for his size and position. A better 3-point shooter as of late, kind of like the prototypical role player to that Portland Trailblazers team. Just plays defense, knocks down 3-point shots, can rebound a little bit. There's a little bit of everything. So you like Aminu? I think that's the perfect kind of 6th, 7th man off the bench. Could be a 4 or 5 starter depending on the team. If you're trying to compete for a title, you definitely don't want Aminu starting. I think that's more of a role guy.
I think he could be your 5th option if you have like a really talented starting lineup. Like he's just your glue guy in there. Like you said, his 3-point shot is inconsistent. It's improved, and he has moments where he's really good. I think he's a guy that could, he plays well off of other players. Like he has this specific role. He plays his role, and he's good at it. Like he's a guy that I think will be a nice ad for somebody because he's not going to break the bank, but he's going to have a positive impact on your team.
Yeah, and I mean, he had a really rough postseason. I know he shot like under 30% from 3. I think under 40% from the field. Just had a rough shooting performance, but still a guy who's definitely going to have plenty of landing spots on the open market.
Yeah, I think best off now, though, you mentioned it, he's probably best as a bench player, but it's not like he's terrible as a starter. I think as he's getting older, obviously, in age, and see what happens with him. He's another guy that can land in a lot of different locations, and another guy that's going to be hard to determine its price tag. I mean, there's a real possibility I think he stays in Portland too.
Definitely. No, I think there's I feel like Portland's got this own little niche and culture to them that I think that core just likes playing together in general. So it's more of that, like, we're just going to keep trying to run it back, and maybe ownership makes some sort of move to bring in a bigger name. I feel like a lot of these guys want to be in Portland.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see what happens in terms of that. But moving on to, let's see, you wanted to talk about Bobby Portis?
I'm a fan of Bobby Portis. Yeah, crazy eyes, breaking faces a couple years ago, and everything else. I mean, this guy's going to be 24 this upcoming year. Averaged 14.3 points per game, shot 44 and 40% from the field and from three with the Wizards the second half of last year. Defensively, not great, obviously, a little bit undersized. A decent rebounder, had 8.6 rebounds per game with the Wizards. I like Bobby Portis for his age and value. I think this is a guy who can come off the bench and give you some offense, can give you some rebounding, at least some sort of scoring push off the bench in a limited role. I'm a fan of Portis. I think this is a guy that team will look at when they strike out on these top guys.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting player because you're not really sure exactly what you're getting. He had played some really good moments in Washington, Chicago. There's the whole punching Nikola Mirotic in the face thing. So there's a little bit off the court stuff that's a little concerning. I think if you're a contender, you don't necessarily want to throw money at a guy like this because you're not really sure what he brings. But if you're a fringe playoff team, a young playoff team, or just a young team that's not in the playoff picture yet, why not take a swing on Bobby Portis? Maybe he can develop his skill set a little bit farther, get a little bit more consistent, and improve in a lot of areas because there is skills there. It's just about kind of developing those skills to the highest extent.
Yeah.
So
and 20 again, going to be 23, going to be 24. So we still have at least 1 or 2 years to really see what he further develops into.
Yeah, 100%. So we'll kind of go from there and see. I think he's going to be a guy that maybe some of the young teams that have cap space just go after. Like, it would just make sense to bring him in because maybe he can pop into something bigger.
Yeah.
In terms of the other guys, we still got Taj Gibson. Obviously, we know what he is. He's a veteran. Markieff Morris came off a rough year. Kenneth Faried's probably more of a center in my eyes. Jeff Green's the guy that always feels like a good signing but ends up not really being anything. Jermichael Green is somewhat interesting in my eyes because he played pretty good for Los Angeles in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, just a Jeff Green point. Jeff Green, like, we just have this built-up thought on what he should be and who he is, and I still think he's gonna. I mean, he is not the worst guy you can find to be your 7th or 8th man off the bench. Inconsistency is definitely an issue, but I do like Jeff Green. And then you made a good point about Jermichael Green, going from Memphis to L.A. A part of that, I think Garrett Temple went with him to L.A. as well. I mean, Jermichael Green's that kind of can play the 5 at his size, can shoot a little bit, can rebound. A guy he's like one of the last free agents off the board last summer, if I recall, right? Did we have to wait a while to see him get signed?
I think it was maybe the summer before that. I think he signed a 2-year deal with Memphis, but he did. He was a restricted free agent. There was a lot of talk about him signing with somewhere because I know this because the Nets were one of the teams interested. Right. Then he ended up taking a smaller 2-year deal because he was like the year prior, it looked like his contract was ascending, didn't necessarily play great in Memphis, but what he did in LA was a little bit better. And I think he's a really nice big to bring off the bench. Like you said, he's kind of a 4-5 tweener, can play that small ball 5, can shoot the 3, not necessarily an amazing 3-point shooter. And he also brings some physicality to the team. So Jermichael Green could end up being a steal for somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at his broad stats. So last year with the Clippers in 24 games, shot 48% from the field, 41% from 3. Shot right around 40% from 3 all year last year between Memphis and the Clippers. So you definitely like that from a tweener.
Yeah, and you like it because he has some physicality to him. It's not like he's a frail 4 or 5. Like, he has some size to him. He's not necessarily the tallest guy, but he brings some weight.
Yeah, 6'9", 230.
Yeah, so that's not bad at all. Any other power forwards you want to mention before we get out of here?
No, I think that wraps it up.
All right. As always, thank you, everybody, for listening and watching on YouTube, whatever it may be. We'll be hopping on again in a couple minutes to do center previews, so be sure to check that out on YouTube. And if you want to see all the recorded shows, iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, ggbasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube, obviously.